What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Cosmic Sans Podcast, where we dissect the journeys of artists, thought leaders, and just damn good people. My name's Howard Pinsky, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with author and public speaker Goldie Chan. We're going to be talking all about her experience writing her first book, creating 800 videos in 800 days, and being known as the Oprah of LinkedIn. So, let's peel back the layers of Goldie Chan. Goldie, how are you?
I'm doing okay. We're getting to the start of the year. I think everybody is starting to come back really from the vacation mentally, at least.
I'm almost there. Last week was a little bit slow. This week things are ramping up, but I'm still in that, if you send me a Slack message that says circling back after the break, I'm probably
Right.
going to ignore it. I'm
Yes,
still in that phase.
I think we're all circling back right now.
It's going to be a while. We're going to be circling for a while,
We're gonna be
but I want
circling.
to dive into the world of Goldie, but I want to start with something that I saw during my research.
Mhm.
Somebody described you as the Oprah of LinkedIn, and I want to know all the things about this.
Yes. So, I feel like you and I have never talked about this before, but I'll start with the shorter version, which is in 2017, I started creating content on LinkedIn. It was funny because it wasn't content then, that title. It was really creating videos. So I got into their LinkedIn video beta and I started creating these daily videos. And one video became two videos, became 10, eventually became over 800 daily consecutive videos on the platform, which, as you know, as you are always creating, that's a lot. I think I can safely say that's a lot of videos. And that's a lot of daily videos. So part of that journey, I garnered the nickname of the Oprah of LinkedIn. That was specifically from the Huffington Post, but a lot of other press. And actually, ironically, internally at LinkedIn, there's people that call me that. And so it's so fun because I was doing a lot of things where I was talking to people about branding and marketing, and I was interviewing a lot of people. So they were like, oh, this is just like your Oprah, right?
That is wild. And I read about the 800 LinkedIn daily videos, and I want
Yes.
to get to that shortly because my mind as a content creator,
Right.
I can't even put myself in your shoes creating 800 videos every single, well, you didn't do 800 a day, but 800 over, every single day.
Yeah.
That is wild. But we'll get to that in a second. But for those who don't know who Goldie is, give me the rundown of, you're an author, you're a cancer survivor, you're all
Yes.
sorts of amazing things. Tell me all the things and we'll dive into them a little bit.
Okay, great. So let's start with the most recent, which is I'm newly an author, personal branding for introverts. Yay. It mentions Adobe Express twice in it. So please pick it up. Please pick up this amazing book. I'm also an introvert. And I used to write for Forbes. So I was a senior contributor at Forbes, writing about personal branding and storytelling in the digital age. I also create a lot of content on LinkedIn and also a little bit on, I would say, Instagram. I'm an Adobe ambassador, which I'm really excited about and thankful for. And in my spare time, I write for Archie Comics. So that's another fun thing that I do that I'm always excited to talk about. And I'm a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in 2022. I'm very thankful to be now in the survivor, in the almost the remission stage of my cancer journey. Very thankful for that as well. And I currently live in sunny Los Angeles. And if we want to go even further back, a lot of my a lot of my work history was in-house in digital marketing and community building, um, behind the scenes before in 2017, 2018, I went in front of the scenes.
Yeah, I love all of that. There's so much there that I want to touch on. Personal branding and
Mhm.
introvert, because I'm a massive introvert myself.
Yeah.
You're an author. There's so many things, but let's start with the book because that's your most
Yes.
recent endeavor. I would
Yes.
love to know how that came to be and where the subject came from. Because you mentioned you're an introvert. This is
Yes.
personal branding from. It seems like it was like a nice collision of all your worlds coming together. But Where did that come from? What did you just wake up one morning and be like, "You know what? I'm gonna write a book," or were there conversations that kinda led up to that moment?
Yeah, so when I started, I would say, blowing up on LinkedIn, people were reaching out to me with all sorts of opportunities. One was Forbes, and another one was actually an editor at one of the big 5 publications. They were like, "Do you wanna write a book?" And I was like, "Do I wanna write a book?" I'd never thought about writing a book. So that's where the original idea started really brewing was 2017, 2018. I was like, I really want to do a personal branding book. And along that way, I realized I really wanted to do a personal branding for introverts book because I think there are so many beautiful general personal branding books out there. And there are so many great introvert books out there, but there's not a lot of introvert books that are first of all, I don't think there's really quite, another personal branding for introverts book out there through one of the big 5 publishers that focuses both on your online and your offline life. I think a lot of the more traditional books around introversion focus a lot on offline and how you can talk to people in person, but not a lot of books focus on how you can really connect with people, over the internet, which is, as you know, as an introvert, as a fellow introvert, it is so powerful to connect with other introverts and extroverts online and grow your presence that way because oftentimes it can feel less overwhelming.
I agree, and as an introvert, it's been wonderful to just sit behind the computer, sit in my office here,
Yes.
and, connect with people online, build up communities of hundreds of thousands, millions of people. I always love
Yes.
throwing out the fact that at one point when Google Plus was a thing, I had, like, 5 million followers there. They meant nothing because it was just, like, auto-followed by some list that Google put
Right.
me in, but it's really fun and powerful to be able to connect with so many people from the comfort of your home. But I would imagine that in the journey of building a brand and a
Yeah.
business, you have to break that barrier,
Mm.
becoming to go from introvert to extrovert, whether you fake it or not. And for me, there's a lot of faking when it comes to talking to people and presenting
Mm.
on stage. What has been your experience, and what advice would you give to people who are like me, who love to sit at home in an office, but really should be out there, putting themselves out there, speaking, meeting people, connecting with others?
So, first of all, I think the greatest nightmare for most introverts is small talk. And I know certainly I've have faced that myself. I once was in my early 20s, I once gave myself a task, which was every single day I would go to the coffee shop that was around the corner from the startup that I was working at in the Bay Area. And I would go there and I would try to make small talk in line, and if you're familiar with this place, it no longer exists sadly, but it was Blue Bottle at Mint Plaza in San Francisco. So it's a hyper specific location, and the line always wrapped around the corner, for that particular location, and every single day, I would make myself say hi to somebody. And to me, it was less of trying to become an introvert. This is the hill that I will stand on, which is I think that introverts don't have to ever fully become extroverts to be successful. I do think that introverts have to learn tactics and have to learn strategies that don't drain their batteries completely in order to get outside and talking to people. So, for example, both you and I go to conferences. Whenever I'm at a conference, I always try to build in time when I'm not talking to anyone. So whether that's time when I go hide in the hotel room, or that's time in the green room, or that's simply I just have no meetings. This is quiet time for me to wander around where I'm not actively talking to somebody. I try to build in that time. I try to be really respectful of what I like to call the introvert battery, and you need a different kind of rest to fill that battery. So for an extrovert, that battery is filled by talking to exciting and interesting people. And I always define introverts actually as I can be talking to the most exciting, most interesting stranger there is, but my battery will just naturally do this over time. It will naturally kind of go down. And that's just because my battery is not necessarily filled by talking directly with people. My battery is filled by introspection. My battery is filled by creative time. My battery is filled by learning. And that not is not necessarily with other people directly. So I like to think about it that way, which is instead of thinking, how can I better become an extrovert? How can I build in ways that don't drain my battery as much? And I would say, of course, the first step, you're absolutely right, is still getting outside. So, can you join a group? Can you join a meetup group, for example, that is something that you are interested in? Maybe you like hiking, maybe you like cooking, maybe you like reading. Join a book club. There's this really fascinating book club out there that I think has chapters in many states in the US, and that's called the Silent Book Club. And people gather and they literally just sit around and read books silently. And if that's not introvert friendly, I don't know what is.
I love, love, love when you talked about the introvert battery. That resonates so well with me
Yes.
because, as I go to a lot of conferences. I
Yep.
speak on stage in front of
Mhm.
hundreds, thousands of people, and there's usually time at the beginning before the presentation starts where there's mingling, there's networking, and some events are
Yep.
bigger than others, and I really have to limit myself
Mhm.
during that networking phase. Not because I'm being rude, not because I
Mhm.
don't like the people there, but because literally, like you're talking about, my battery will drain.
Mhm.
Sometimes very quickly, depending on how my day has gone already, depending on what time of the day that presentation is. Sometimes it's 8 in the morning. Great, my battery's filled. I can talk a little bit more. But if it's like 6 o'clock at night and I've been working all day, my battery is already like half depleted. And
Yep.
when I start talking with people, I agree with you. Like, it could be the most interesting person in the
Mhm.
world. I could be so excited about talking with them, but my battery is going down and down, and then I'm expected to get on stage and
And shine.
perform and
Yeah.
yeah, and do demos and be exciting, and then I gotta mingle again afterwards. So it is so true when you talk about like figuring out ways to keep that battery charged. And I'm thinking of Adobe Max just a few weeks. Was it just a month ago? I don't know
I
what
have
time.
no concept of time.
I
I
have
think that was
none,
even
0.
too I will say this, I don't know if I would ever do this again, and as you know, I love Adobe, and Adobe Max is so fun. It was overlapped with my book launch, so I literally was doing 14, 16-hour days because I was doing Adobe
Oh,
Max all day, as you know, and for me in particular, what was I doing this year? I was speaking, I was doing mentoring, I was doing, working at the booths and stuff like that, and then afterwards, I was driving to the bookstores and then I was signing books and I was meeting with people around the books and stuff like that. But Adobe Max is such a great example because it's so fun. I feel like I meet such cool people that I genuinely like so much because they're so creative, they're so wonderful. It still is draining.
it is, and, I'm thinking of my presentation this time at Adobe Max.
Mhm.
The hours before, I
Yep.
was in the speaker room just by myself on my
Yep.
computer
Yep.
designing things because that,
Yes.
like you mentioned,
It's very soothing for the
recharges my
brain.
battery. And then, I went to the thing, talked a little bit, hit the stage, and then I was drained afterwards. So it's so true. I just love the battery example.
Yeah, and I
But
will say
I wanna
one thing that
Yeah.
I tell folks, especially with conferences, is to and for extroverts too, is to try this one exercise, which is even at a conference like Adobe Max, take 10 minutes. Go physically outside, right? Go outside the conference venue, stand outside, and for the first 2 minutes, don't look at your phone, don't look at your iPad. Don't look at your Apple Watch if you have one. Don't look at any digital devices for a full 2 minutes because it helps just to reset your brain and gets you into a calmer state.
Absolutely. And you're so focused on whatever it is that you're about to do, whether it's talking on
Yes.
stage or presenting or mingling or whatever,
Yes.
that you're continuously, and if you're going outside on your phone, you're probably looking at something that relates to that. So your mind isn't really reset. And I
Right.
just love, when at conferences, just walking somewhere,
Yes,
just
just
go to
walking.
get coffee, just
Yes.
not focus on anything. And it helps a lot. But I want to go back to the book because I, at some point, was contacted. This was many, many, many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, to write a
Yeah.
book. I think it was on some Photoshop. I don't know what it was, some Photoshop book. And I started the process, and man, so quickly I got burnt out. And they wanted like a very large book, and I think this
Okay.
was gonna be like a print book.
Yeah.
I got burnt out. It's a difficult process. So I'm
Yes.
wondering, from your perspective, what challenges did you run into? And it sounds like this is your first book.
Yes.
Um, i- was it everything you expected? Was it a lot more than you expected? Did you get burnt out? How did you deal with all that?
Well, I definitely think I very rarely meet any authors who say, "I executed the perfect book launch," like, everything went smoothly, everything went perfectly. Um, as I've been talking to more and more people are telling me, "Oh, I wish I had done this differently, I wish I'd done that differently." And for me, I think I learned so much in the process of not only writing the book, but getting the book out there and onto bookshelves. So I will say this, I actually had 2 book deals happen with this one book. The original publisher literally went bankrupt. So before they could actually publish my book, they shut down shop. So I had a book, I had an editor, and we're trucking along. They're like, "We want it like this." And I think I rewrote this particular book in its entirety, 55,000 words, 3 times, because I went through 3 different editors to get to this version of the book and at the publisher that I'm currently at, which is Basic Venture, which is one of under Hachette, which is one of the big 5 publishers. And the process of writing a book, I think is like the process of designing, right? You go through so many iterations and then, especially if you're at a traditional publisher, there's other inputs, right? Just like when we do client work or we, we have outside inputs for our design work, it's like, okay, this person wants this, and then you have to put it into, at least for me, because my book was mostly words, almost all words. It was all in the words, right? It's all in the what are you expressing? We want this chapter to be like this. We want this story to be like this. And it's navigating a lot of different cooks in the kitchen in some ways. But I think I learned so much about honestly writing and writing really long form because before that I had been writing a lot of articles for Forbes, probably hundreds of articles by the time I left in 2024, but I'd never written a book, like a book before, and so it was cool to write it, and then the launching the book was just so fascinating because you have all these months of preparation and talking about the book, then it comes out, and then technically, I'm in the year where I'm doing my book tour, so now I'm going around with the book and I'm speaking on the book. And actually, later this week, I'll be in San Francisco doing a wonderful event at a local store in San Francisco, Chinatown, around my book. And it's neat to see people come up to me and be like, I read your book. It was really, really helpful. I'm an introvert. And because my book is for introverts, I don't get a lot of people loudly telling me that my book is helpful. I get a lot of quiet folks that tell me that the book was really, really helpful. But I think if anyone out there is thinking about writing a book, my suggestion is, of course, to go ahead and write it. Try writing it. I think so many people stop at the stage where they think about writing it, and burnout is so real. At least for me, what was helpful is I had inescapable deadlines. So I had when the publisher said version one is absolutely due. Contractually, you need to turn in by this date. And I think if it was just something that I had in my head of like, I really want to write a book. Maybe I'll do it by this time. I think not having deadlines, I don't know that I would have finished writing the book.
Yes, and I do that for myself as well when I'm working on projects. Even if there isn't a very harsh deadline, I give myself a deadline because I know with my
Mhm.
ADHD that I'm going to be working on 14 different projects over the
Yes.
course of a day or a few days. And, I'll chip away at all of them, but will they all get done in time? Possibly not. That's for another discussion.
Yes.
But I have to give myself, especially for higher priority projects, I have to give
Yeah.
myself a deadline because that helps tremendously, making sure I stay focused. Maybe take those 14 things and narrow it down to 7 so I can focus more time on the one thing that really has to get done. But you mentioned, and I was going to ask about this, long form content
Mm.
because you were used to writing articles on
Mhm.
LinkedIn and for Forbes, and they're relatively short, maybe a
Mhm.
few paragraphs, maybe a few pages long, but now you're writing a book. How
Right.
was it diving into that? And is there advice you would give to people who are moving in that direction as well? Because I would imagine the story is different, right? You're
Yeah.
probably building up throughout the book several hundred pages versus, one or two paragraphs.
Yeah, so the way I would say this, the way I personally brainstorm is I'm a very tactic, like I like tactile things. So I brainstorm over post-it notes. I literally have post-it notes right in front of me. So when I brainstormed, especially the original version of my book, I did probably about 50 to 100 Post-it notes that were all ideas that I wanted to put into the book, and then I organized those into groupings that later became chapters. So I think that just like with big projects or big tasks, it's so much easier to break things down into micro ideas, micro steps. And so when I broke down the book, at least for me, into I really want to talk about, for example, the introvert battery, or I want to talk about burnout, or I want to talk about introverts and extroverts. What section does that make sense to put it into? Or is this its own section? Do I need to flesh this out? And so I think it was really helpful for me to break things down into very bite sized pieces. And then the way I wrote the book was really bite sized steps because I didn't start by saying, I'm going to write a whole chapter. I started by saying, okay, what's this idea? Is this idea something that I think I could write a couple paragraphs on? Or, it's a full chapter idea. What size of an idea is it? And then also, yeah, what is the story? I think so many things are about storytelling these days. I think what is the story that you're trying to tell over the course of a book? Or if you're doing, I like love to think about long form video content, right? If you're doing a YouTube video that is the history of erasers, you probably have a story that you're telling over the course of that long form video too, but that story is made up of elements. And how do those elements tie together and make sense? I also personally, this is just the way my brain works. I think about words like music, right? You can have a song that sounds very different than another song that's made up of exactly the same notes. And I think that writing is the same. You can have a story that makes sense because the beats all make sense and it flows. And I think that great writing, or at least good writing, hopefully always flows. And long form content, if you're thinking about that, there should be a flow. Like it should make sense, like why you went from A to B to C to D to E to, and especially mapping that out, I also think it makes bigger projects just more manageable and easier to do in the long run.
Yeah, and there absolutely has to be a flow and things have to tie together, especially these days where people don't have attention spans.
No.
And they'll watch a YouTube video for 30 seconds and if there isn't something in those 30 seconds that remind you to stay because something else is coming or a
Right,
cliffhanger, right? It's weird to think about like a cliffhanger after 30 seconds, but
right.
it's the same thing in writing, I would imagine. is you really have to give people a reason to continue reading your book and progressing from page to page, chapter to chapter. And I would imagine, again, haven't written a full book, but that's got to be a very difficult challenge to string that all together. And were the editors and the other people involved really helpful in this?
So I also brought on my own developmental editor who was helping me with the big structural things at the very beginning. So I said, here's the structure that I had, especially honestly between versions 2 and 3. I'll be totally honest. Version 1, I already knew what I wanted to do because it was a very textbook version. It was pretty easy for me to string that together. Version 2, I was like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing here. By version 3, I'm like, I need help. And I think so many of us out there are so resistant to having help because we're like, I can do this. I'm able to do this. And I think it's less about are you able to do it? Are you smart enough to do it? Are you creative enough to do it? And more just, do you have the internal bandwidth to do it? And that's when it's helpful to bring in help. So that's actually when I brought in my own developmental editor who was helping me with that really, like I said, structural part of it. So really thinking about, okay, chapter 1 looks like this, chapter 2 looks like this, chapter 3. And they weren't helping me write, but they were helping me with the skeleton because a human body needs a great skeleton, so does a story, right? And also the team then that I went back to at the actual publisher, once I was able to put together what I thought was the right skeleton with my team, then I was like, is this the right skeleton? And then I went back and forth with the team that was actually at the publisher because they had their own goals with the book and what they wanted to see in the book. So it was helpful to be talking a lot with other people and not be in a vacuum developing the book, and really, really helpful to get early readers who are like, "Hey, I think that this chapter maybe would be helpful if you mentioned this, or I'd love to see this." It's so helpful, as with so many things, to not always create in a vacuum.
100% agree. And I'm thinking of myself designing or working on a project at work.
Yeah.
And, I have an idea of what I want to create. I have an idea of what it should look like. I have the skills to make it look beautiful.
Mhm.
But I'm in such this bubble when I'm sitting alone by myself designing that you become accustomed to what you're looking at. And at the end of like 4 hours, you'll be like, yeah, it looks beautiful.
Right.
But then you pass it along to other people and you get others involved and they start giving you feedback. And because they're seeing things that you are not seeing.
Yes.
And it helps so much just to get some other eyes or other ideas on your work. And the skeleton idea that you gave makes perfect sense because once you get that skeleton in place, everything else is going to start to fall beautifully into the project. You put the
Yes.
organs there, you know where to put the face and the
Yeah.
hands and all these other things,
Right.
and it just gives you a little bit more freedom to dial in on the exact areas that you need to focus on.
And
So
I
I
think
would
it's so helpful to also, really try to do that skeleton initially on your own, because then that is, of course, your creative input into things.
100% agree. So
Yeah.
your book is about personal branding. It's about branding, right?
Yes.
Um, how important is branding for those who are starting their career, starting a business, content creation?
Right.
What would you say for that?
So I think in this day and age, if you have social media, there's a chance that you already have a personal brand. But there's also a chance that you have a personal brand that you are not directing because you're putting out content, images of you and your friends or just fun things, and you're not always thinking about, okay, if a potential client sees this or a potential boss sees this, what will they think? And in particular, I think a lot about LinkedIn, and I think a lot about Instagram because those are usually the 2 places that prospective, employers will go to first to look and see what your presence is like. And if we just take a step back, personal branding is so important because it can open so many doors that you would never expect it to open. I was not necessarily looking to go write for Forbes, but they found me. And it's funny because Forbes thought that because I made so many videos, I could write, and I just happened to already be a writer. I happen to already love writing, but I wasn't actually writing that much at the time, and they were just like, "Great, we'd love you to talk about personal branding from your perspective," very meta, of building a personal brand, but it was helpful for me to be so present and have a, once again, very meta, a personal brand about personal branding that people could reference because I had all these pieces of content. I had all these, I guess, data points that people could see, "Oh, maybe Goldie does know what she's talking about around personal branding." And I think about other people that I meet who are, for example, animators who start by doing their own independent animation on their own on social media, and then they can show that as pieces of their portfolio because it's not necessarily tied to, say, the work they do at a studio. It's not tied to client work. It's their own independent work, but it showcases their direct skill in being able to animate. And I think that's all part of personal branding, which is how can you show and also direct the story of who you are, and that will influence your reputation, which is the story that other people tell about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah, and the animator example you gave is perfect because
Yes.
I often hear all the time from, creators, designers, illustrators that they're not sure how to build up their portfolio. They're not sure how to attract eyes. And the answer is usually, well, just start creating stuff.
Yeah.
Whether it doesn't matter what it is, whether you're creating erasers like you were talking about earlier, or, illustrations, just start doing and
Yeah.
start uploading on social. Start building that story because people will find you. And, you mentioned the difference between creating for yourself and creating for your studio. And that's a good it's an interesting point in conversation because there are a lot of times where a designer and an illustrator is creating something
Mhm.
that they literally cannot show off to the world. They're creating
Right.
things under NDA. They're working
Right.
on, big projects that, Disney or
Yep.
Pixar or Marvel or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and they can't even talk about what they're working on behind the scenes. And it's got to be frustrating.
Yeah.
But if you're creating things on the side and then uploading them to Instagram or Behance or your
Mhm.
personal website,
Mhm.
that's going to start telling stories. That's going to start driving eyes. And maybe you're not looking for all those eyes right now. Maybe you're very comfortable at your job at Disney, working behind the scenes. But that may not always be the case. So I think you need to always be thinking about your personal brand, your social profiles, just in case, because you never know when, unfortunately, you might lose a job or you might just not be happy in your current situation. You might want to switch. So, would you recommend that people are always maintaining and updating these personal profiles just in case that they need to pull them out?
So one thing that we say a lot in the LinkedIn ecosystem is when you by the time you need more connections on LinkedIn, you probably should have already gotten those connections on LinkedIn. And I think that's true in your career. By the time you're looking for a job, it would be helpful if you had already been placing those, I think about Lego a lot, right? Individual bricks, Lego bricks to get towards the right kind of career and positioning yourself, which is what you're talking about, positioning yourself as a strong candidate for that role, even if you're not looking for that. And you would be surprised at how many opportunities, once again, will come to you completely unprompted. Or when you start applying, people will look at your social profiles or they'll look at your online presence and say, "Oh, okay, I see what you've done over the past few months, right? Over the past year." I think so many people scramble and then they're like, "In the last 3 days, I've done this," right? I think so many people want to be like, "Okay, I did 30 videos. I did them all in 3 days, and that should count." But 30 videos over the course of a month is often much more powerful than 30 videos over the course of 3 days, because when I meet those people that do that, they'll do essentially a content dump and then they'll run away. They won't post again for 3 or 4 months, and I have been guilty of this too. For health reasons, I've stopped posting, or because life has just gotten too busy, I've stopped posting. But if you can have a regular cadence, especially of content, that will be so helpful with making sure that you're a little bit more layoff proof in the long run.
Yeah, and I think it's not just, the cadence and the consistency isn't just for potential clients or
Mhm.
potential, uh bosses that or companies that are gonna be
Right,
looking. It's been a
right.
long day.
Yeah.
But, it's also for the algorithm, right?
Yes.
A lot of algorithms, whether it's
Yes.
Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or whatever, they're constantly looking for consistency. If you stop posting for, a month, you're gonna be deprioritized in the algorithm. God forbid you get sick and you have cancer, right?
Mhm,
As you know,
mhm.
unfortunately, it's gonna get hit. The algorithm is just not in your favor.
Yep.
Um, but let's talk if you're open to it about your
Yeah,
cancer journey
yeah.
because, you went through it not too long ago, and I would love to hear what your experience was with that.
Yeah, so when I think about my cancer journey, first of all, it was the longest time I've taken off of just completely not working on almost anything, like no projects, because there's times when I'm not working, but I'm always working on something. Like, I don't know if I am assuming you're the same where when you're like, I'm not working, but that means that you're not working is usually you have like three private projects that you're working on that are like your for fun projects. So I'm always working. And it was the first time really in my adult post-college life that I spent such an extended period of time not working, and I made a very personal choice to, first of all, be very public with my journey, but also to take time off of work and just completely shut down and focus on my body and my healing, and it was such a wild time. I'm very thankful and grateful to my community who was very supportive during my journey, and I think because people knew because I was so open with it, I had so many people reach out to me that said like, "You know what? I actually am going through, either cancer directly or I'm going through a major health thing. I don't wanna tell anyone because I'm so afraid people won't hire me. I'm so afraid people won't work with me, and that is so real, because I think there is still a stigma with around health, especially in the US, around being able to work or being, capable of doing XYZ, and I know that when I really started to get back into work, which I would say truly was in 2024/2025, so really just kind of last year was one of my first years really trying to get back into work. It was tough for me too because I was restarting my career from what felt like 0. But for anyone out there that is going through, especially a health crisis, or you're caretaking for someone that's going through a health crisis or going through a major layoff, it may feel like you're starting from 0, but the beauty is you likely are not. You likely have a network of people who care about you, who want to see you succeed. You likely have skills and experience. And this is actually when it can be a very powerful thing to showcase what you do, even if you're not being necessarily paid for it. It's a good time to dust off that portfolio and add some new independent pieces to it that you can work on. It's a great time to do informational interviews. I growing up in the Bay Area and growing up in tech, we always talked about informational interviews, and I realize now living in Los Angeles, people don't always talk about that as an idea. And an informational interview is simply reaching out to somebody at a company that you like or has a job that you aspire to and saying, it's not you're not asking for a job, you're asking for their time. And it's almost like a mini mentorship session. You're asking them to give you information on how they got to where they are. So you're asking them also to say like, "Oh, in their wisdom, how do they think that you could maybe get there?" And once again, you're not asking for a job, you're simply asking for information, which is why it's called an informational interview. And I think it's so powerful that at any step in your career, you can ask for informational interviews with people that you respect or people that maybe you don't know but are in roles that you respect or at companies that you respect. And a lot of it takes, I think, a little bit of strategy and a little bit of stupidity because you need to be strategic in terms of who you reach out to and the message that you send, but you need to be a little stupid in that you need to be kind of brave and actually send those messages and actually take the chance to do those outreaches.
Yes, and I have received several of those requests over the years. And unfortunately, and I wish I was able to really, help with this, but it was always at the worst possible time.
Yeah.
Whether I'm working on a massive project and, it sucks saying no to somebody. And I try to, expand a little bit in text versus, a video call. But the worst that can happen is someone says no. And then you can
Yes.
move on because there's so many. The nice thing about the internet, sort of, there's not nice things about the internet too. But the
Yeah.
nice thing is that we have access to so many people. Like
Yes.
I can send a message to a CEO if I wanted to
Yes.
and request an interview. With this podcast, I'm sending so many messages to artists that I've looked up to for so many years. And I know that many of them will just say no, or
Right.
many of them have booking fees or they're working on big projects and they'll tell me in a few months we'll talk about it. But that's fine. It's getting that courage to send the message. It's opening up those lines of communication because you never know, months, years down the line,
Mhm.
you may bump into that person again and that line of communication will start going. But so you just have to get that courage. And I know it's difficult being an introvert,
Yeah.
building up the
Yeah, that's why I
courage
always
to
say you
send
have to
these
be a little
messages.
bit stupid. You have to
You
have a
do.
little bit of stupidity because when I say be brave, people are like, wow, bravery, that's such a massive, you're hiking Mount Everest, you're brave to do that. And I'm like, instead, let's think about stupidity. What was a stupid decision that you made? I am positive every single person that I know has had at least one very dumb decision or choice that they've made in their lives, big or small, right? And so if you can apply that same thinking that I probably had one dumb decision in my life for sure, I can apply that then to outreaching to people and I think that on the opposite side, I'm like you where I get people who reach out to me and ask for time and I don't always have time. And so I'll say no, but I think that on the opposite side of it, if you are getting a lot of outreaches, it's absolutely okay to protect your time and to protect your energy and to agree to things that you do have the energy for. Because also, if you agree to too many things that you don't have the energy for, I find that at least for me, I don't always show up at my best, right? I don't always show up and I'm not the most helpful. So you are actually being helpful by saying no because you're telling them, okay, try another door. And so I like to also always think that no's are never personal, but yeses are.
100%. And I
And
do the same thing at
take
work too.
that. Yes.
Yeah, I do the same thing at work. I get so many meeting requests by so many different teams to participate in meetings where there's like 50 people.
Yeah.
And I really have to step back and think, is this meeting worth my time? Am I going to benefit from being obviously if I'm presenting or they need my direct feedback, sure,
Right,
absolutely I will
right,
be there. But many of these meetings are, an hour, sometimes 2 hours long,
right.
and I would rather be putting my effort into projects that will benefit me, benefit the company. And sometimes sitting through a 2 hour long meeting is just not worth my time because I know I can't focus on both things at the same time. And if I'm trying to do that, the work that I'm doing on the side is not going to be at its best because I'm
Right.
trying to focus on the meeting and what people are saying. So I say no a lot. And when I joined the company I'm working for now, I used to say yes to everything, and
Yep.
that burnt me out very quickly.
Yeah.
So I've gotten very good at saying no. And it'll piss some people off. Some people will not come to you again for additional opportunities, but I think you have to protect your mental health, you have to protect your burnout, you have to limit your burnout.
Yeah.
Um and saying no is a skill. It really is. But, saying yes to the important things helps tremendously, I think.
Yes, I think that to me, no is a powerful boundary that we all need to know and learn. And for many of us, it requires us to learn, at least for me, it required me to learn how to say no over the course of my career because I'm a people pleaser. So, especially for me, it's really difficult to say no. And I always want to help. I'm a helper and a people pleaser. So, for me, no is a very difficult word, but it is a very helpful word in my personal life. And yes, I think the idea of saying then yes to the right opportunities, that's powerful. And I think about there's a great book, The Year of Yes, that was out. I think it's also powerful to have periods and seasons of your life when you say yes to a lot of things, right? When you say yes to things that maybe you wouldn't have said yes to before, especially if you are in a slump, if you are in a period when you feel like you lack purpose, when you feel like you lack direction. So maybe you have the energy, you have the time, but you don't know exactly what you should be doing. That's when I think it's the most powerful time to say yes to things that you normally wouldn't say yes to. But if you're in a time when you have no time, you have no extra resources, you're burned out, you have 50 million projects, that's the time to lean into the no.
And you've said yes to many opportunities over the last few years,
Yes.
including many public speaking opportunities. And I would
Yes.
love to hear a little bit about that because, as an introvert, you and myself, public
Yes.
speaking is terrifying. At least it was at the beginning. I remember my
Yes.
first big public speaking event. It was actually at Adobe Max in 2015. I've told the story many times. I won't go into all the details. I was freaked out. The session was terrible. Everything was the worst. I thought my career was just imploding in front of my eyes. But I learned from it. I got better as a public speaker. I learned to enjoy public speaking, which is very strange for me to say now. Now
Mhm.
that looking back at my past, I've learned mental tricks to get better when I'm going on stage to almost like become a different person. So for you, what have you learned over the years to go from introvert to really extrovert on stage, speaking in front of who knows how many people?
Yeah, speaking in front of thousands and thousands of people at times. So for me, I think about it as it is always a cozy conversation for me. So I don't think about it as I am speaking individually to hundreds of people or thousands of people because that's terrifying. That mentally for me, that's a terrifying thought. But if I think that it's always a cozy conversation, like you and I are having this wonderful, delightful one-on-one conversation right now, that's what I think of when I think about public speaking. And I think it's really helpful that a lot of times when I'm public speaking, most of the time I'm public speaking, there's Q&A at the end. So there's not direct feedback. I'm not having person over there saying something, person over there saying something. And I'm sure you've been in these sessions. I've been in these sessions where people still talk anyways. But now I'm more of an experienced speaker, so that's less scary than it was at the very beginning. And I think it's so helpful to think that even though it's one to many, I treat it really still like a one to one. But this is why sometimes the most tiring speaking gigs for me are workshops where I'm doing 1 to 10 or 20, which I'm sure you've also experienced, of course, where you're talking really individually to people. And 10 people at the same time need your energy, need your attention. Everybody has a different comment, and you're tracking what everybody needs at the same time. that to me is oftentimes way more tiring than when I'm speaking to 250 people in a ballroom. Because in that ballroom setting, I'm really delivering something that I've already practiced, I've already rehearsed. It's usually pretty set in stone, and then the Q&A afterwards is hopefully, depending on the conference, really one at a time, a person, or it's, afterwards, I get off the stage, and then we have that, area where people congregate around you, and then you, suffer through that uh, for, 15 to 30 minutes.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about cozy settings,
Yeah.
right? Thinking about talking one or two people, because I am totally the opposite.
Mm,
When I'm presenting in front of, 10, 15, even 5 people at work
yeah,
or in a personal setting, it freaks me the heck out.
yeah.
But when I go on stage in front of, many hundreds of people, I'm great. It's just a big ball of flesh in the
Yeah,
audience,
yeah.
and I
That's why
don't
it's
have to
one.
make.
It's one ball
Yeah,
of flesh.
it's yeah. I mean, I get maybe that's the cozy part.
Yeah.
I don't know. But the more people, in my mind, the more people, the better. It could
Mhm.
be hundreds of thousands. I mean, I've never done that, but it could be hundreds of thousands of people in the crowd, and I would be great. But if it's literally like 30 people staring at me, because I can feel all of their eyes, I can see them staring,
Yeah,
looking around the room,
yeah.
and that freaks me out. I don't know why. It just freaks me out. I would rather, 1,000 people and 20 people walking out because my presentation is garbage or something. But if it's 30 people and one person leaves, I am mentally breaking
Oh,
down.
that is the worst is in you're doing a presentation to 20 to 30 people, and then 2 people get up, and then they're whispering to each other, and then they get up and they leave, and you can see it happening.
Yep. And it could be just that they have to go to the bathroom. Maybe they had
Right.
too much Chipotle for lunch. I don't know. But like just seeing someone walk out,
Right.
just it's a different experience than when you're in front of like thousands of people and one or two people just casually walk out. So it's really interesting the how different speakers treat it mentally. And I
Mhm.
think you have to figure out these things as you go. I've said it time and time again. There will be failures in this journey, becoming a public speaker or a presenter or an educator or whatever it is that you're an author or whatever it is that you do. You're going to
Right.
fail time and time again. But those failures are going to lead to your successes. Thinking about my journey, if I wouldn't have taken in all the failures of my first public speaking event
Right.
and built upon those and tried to learn from what my mistakes were, tried to learn to better myself as a speaker, as a presenter. And I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be doing all these events across the country. I wouldn't be hosting podcasts and talking to amazing people like yourself. So have for you, I don't want to assume that you have failed many times in your life,
I
but
have, but yes.
have you failed? And what have you learned from those failures?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to talk about something that I think is such a beautiful buddy for failure, and that is practice, right? So I think with failure, practice, and then another word that's great is repetition. Just repeating something until you go from bad to okay. And I think I know when I went, especially when in my own public speaking career, when I went from bad to okay, it was really exciting to level up. And then from okay, hopefully you get to good. And from good, hopefully you get to great. I think it's really helpful to keep repeating over time and keep failing. And I've had a ton of failures in my life. It's funny because when I first graduated from college, I actually was a fashion designer. I ran a fashion brand for a couple of years. And then at 22, which is funny to think back now, at 22, my company fell apart and I thought, this is the end. I'm never having a career in anything ever again because at 22 everything felt so big and it was just I was like, well, I'm never working again because this one thing that I did in my professional career didn't work out and that was my first big failure. And I will say that was my first big failure to the point where I was at the time I remember this, I had to have a friend intervention, which is what I call a friend intervention because I was sitting on the floor of my apartment at the time playing Sims, eating peanut butter sandwiches and ramen. And I remember very clearly my friends came into my apartment and my sim was lying on the floor crying. And I was like, I'm fine. I wasn't fine. I was actually what was happening with that Sims. And I had to just go and get my first, real job. So I ended up doing basically, I think it was a marketing assistant role, which is how I got into marketing. It was the first job. And it was really that my friends were like, you need to just get out of the house, like get a job doing anything, truly anything, because you need to be out of the house for your mental health. And I think just always getting back up and then being willing to fail again is so powerful. And when we want to talk about the concept of public speaking, especially with public speaking, I don't think most public speakers start by being just brilliant at public speaking. I'm sure some do, but that's such a minority. And I think so many people, so many more people start by being bad to okay and okay to good. And then over time, there's a chance of becoming really great. And it's about getting your reps in, especially when I think about athletes who have to repeat, practice, do drills over and over and over again. Um, you have to do that with public speaking too, because it is a muscle that you learn over time. And it's hard because public speaking, just by its nature, you're not doing in a vacuum. You're always doing with other humans.
That's true. And there's a lot of similarities between public speaking and athletes because we always assume that athletes don't make mistakes because they've been training their entire lives. They make mistakes all the time.
All the time.
I'm a big hockey fan, big baseball fan, big golf fan, and the amount of mistakes that athletes make or they're just not perfect. Baseball for example,
Mhm,
the absolute best baseball hitters in the world only succeed about 40% of the time.
mhm.
They essentially fail 60% of the time. They
Yeah.
strike out, right? Or they fly out or what ground out, whatever. And there are going to be mistakes when you're public speaking or presenting.
Mhm.
And they might seem terrifying thinking about them. You're going to say something wrong. People are going to laugh. Your mouse isn't going to work. I was talking to Elise Swopes, and she was presenting on the Adobe Max stage in front of tens of thousands of people,
Yeah.
millions watching online, and the mouse just didn't work, right?
Yeah.
So, and these are things that are going to happen. And
Yeah.
I think it's important as a presenter, a public speaker, whatever it is, to embrace these things. Have fun with it because they're
Yeah.
going to happen, right? It's
Yes, I
not
have
the
a
end of the
great
world.
actually example of that. My
Yeah,
first
go for it.
international keynote that I gave, and I remember being so freaked out by this. Is my first time, and speaking not in the U.S., hundreds and hundreds of people in the audience. I walk out so confidently on stage. I'm ready to go, and then I get ready to click to my slides, and you know what I'm missing from my hand? The clicker. And I have to walk right b and, and I now I know I could have, like, motioned somebody to bring it to me on stage, and maybe that's what I would do now as a more experienced speaker, but that time, I then awkwardly, I said, "Oops," and then I walk b and the whole thing was recorded, right? So then I walk back of course it is, and then I walk back off stage to get the clicker, walk back out again, and have to do my intro all over again because I forgot to grab the literal slide clicker thing to advance my slides. And I think that's the beauty of public speaking though. I think really good public speakers actually are a little flawed. I think that's delicious. I think it's nice to have flaws when you publicly speak because it makes it more human and it makes it more interesting because even if you're giving the same keynote over and over and over again, people like a little bit of that humanity in their talks, or at least that's what I personally believe.
Oh, I completely agree. When a public speaker is reading off a script on a teleprompter and very robotic, it just doesn't do it for me. And I
Oh,
think that's why I love when Adobe does live demos at Adobe
yes.
Max is there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be jokes, there's going to be flaws. The Wi-Fi is not going to work, but these things happen. And the difference between, I think, a good public speaker and one that's kind of, rising up in their journey is the how they approach those situations. When the
Mhm.
Wi-Fi doesn't work or a mouse doesn't work, if you visibly freak out and you
Yes.
don't know what to do, everyone's going to be watching you. They're going to be freaking out with you.
Uh-huh.
But if you're like, hey, mouse doesn't work, these things happen, someone's going to come up and fix it. How's everyone doing? How's your
Yeah.
day going? Let's do a little cheer, tell a joke or whatever it is.
Yes.
That's completely, like you said, brings out that human side. And I think as you learn these things, as you learn to embrace mistakes, you're going
Mhm.
to get better very quickly, I believe.
Mhm. And I always think about my 2 favorite words for public speaking, for leadership, for many things in life, honestly, is calm confidence. Because when you are calm and confident on stage, you're a magnetic speaker. I can't think of a single speaker I've seen who is on stage who was when they were calm and confident at the same time and they really owned that stage, they weren't a great speaker, right? They weren't a speaker that is so watchable because no matter what happens, they're always so calm. They always are even if they aren't in control, they always seem like they have an element of control over what's happening, and that calmness is so nice, and the confidence really makes you believe in what they're saying, that you believe that they're an expert, and I then also think confidence is so different than ego, which is how I've seen some speakers, they march on the stage with a lot of ego, but there's something that, as humans, we're still animals. I think we don't resonate as well with that ego. We can sense when it's ego instead of confidence.
Oh, yeah. There are a few people I'm thinking of. I obviously won't name any names,
Don't
but
name
some of
any
them I would
names.
love
This
to
is not that
some of them I
podcast.
would love to have on the podcast.
Yeah.
But,
Of course, of course.
they teeter on the edge of egotistical. And, for me, when I'm watching them on stage, it just feels like they're trying to tell us that they know best and everyone else's opinions or ways are not correct. And
Right.
I think there's a like you said, there's a big difference between that and confidence. Being able to present something and show something off or talk about something confidently, but
Mhm.
not pretending that you know everything. Now, there's a balance there because
Yes.
I think as a public speaker, you need that you need to be a little bit egotistical
Yeah.
to remind yourself that you know best because that's
Right,
going to help you present confidently, right?
right.
But you don't want to tell the audience or try to convince the audience that you are the absolute expert. Does that make sense?
Yes. I actually think that the word expert can be really scary for people. I've met so many people who don't want to ever call themselves an expert because they think it denotes that they're the expert in all things. Or if they're, for example, an expert in Photoshop, they know everything that has ever existed in Photoshop. But I think that you can be an expert in Photoshop and acknowledge that you don't know everything, but also acknowledge that, say, you have a decade of experience using Photoshop, right? And that does make you likely an expert in Photoshop. And it's really about what is your background? What is your skill set? What have you learned over time? What is your experience? And I think expertise at the end of the day is experience. What is your personal experience?
It's funny you mentioned that because just a few weeks ago on Threads, I think it was, someone
Mhm.
posted about discovering a tool. And I jumped in there and were like, I've been using Photoshop for over 20 years and I'm discovering things even to this day all the time. And
Yeah.
people found that very human. And I
Yeah.
think it's important to talk about things you don't know
Yes.
because anytime someone says, I know everything, no, they probably don't.
They
But I want
don't.
to end, yeah. No. I want to end with a few additional questions before we wrap
Yes.
things up. And in this world of AI that we're living in,
Yes.
people are using AI for branding, people are using AI for writing, editing, all sorts of different things. In your opinion, what is something that AI will not be able to replace when it comes to branding?
So people will disagree with me. So this is my hot take, but AI truly cannot replace the heart and humanity behind your personal brand. So I have an exercise that I give to clients when I help them with their personal brand, and that's come up with a set of keywords that define your personal brand. And I know in this day and age, the first thing people do is they go into whatever AI program and they're like, give me the 8 keywords that I need so I can do this homework in 5 seconds. However, the limitation of AI is that it will only ever think using pre existing data sets. And that's just the way AI is right now, right? So it can only think at a certain level and within a certain boundary because it only has so much to pull from. But when you pull from yourself, your own ideas, your own heart, you have not, of course, unlimited ability, but you have the ability to surprise. And that is so powerful. And that is something that AI still, at least right now, is struggling with, which is the ability to surprise and truly surprise yourself. And I think that it is very, very powerful that when you are using AI to write or create or do things, that you still have an element of thinking outside the box if you can on your own to at least initially start. And we talked about that skeleton to start with the skeleton of the idea initially from yourself before you immediately hand off a task to AI, because AI will also tell you who you are based off of pre-existing data points. So if you have been a, I don't know, fly fisherman your whole life, but you secretly want to be a baker, but nowhere online or in person is there a single data point that says you want to be a baker, AI will tell you that you're not a baker even if you have that capability, and that's once again the element of surprise.
I love that. What's a popular branding advice that you would disagree with?
Oh gosh, popular branding advice that I would disagree with. Oh, I know it, and it's based off what I just said, which is copy others. So I think that so many people, when they say start with your own brand, and this is true of launching social channels as well, people always start with like, okay, you want to look at your favorite creators and then you want to really mimic, like go in and mimic exactly what they're doing. And I think the most powerful thing you can do with a personal brand is think about who you like, think about who you dislike, and then from there, in those data points, think about what you could do that somehow goes in between that. So you're not doing the things that you dislike, and you're doing some of the things that you like, and you'll have a really interesting and more blended idea. And this is what I do personally, especially with personal branding, is also people will say, okay, you're in automotive, look at all the top people in automotive, copy what those top people in automotive are doing. But I'm sure you'll agree with this. Instead of thinking in your industry vertical or in your narrow field of reference, look outside and think, okay, what are they doing in beauty and fashion? Or what are they doing over here? If I'm creating on LinkedIn, oftentimes I would be looking at YouTube. I would be looking at Instagram. I look at the other platforms to see what they're doing, to see if I could implement something interesting happening over there. And I love a good over there. What are they doing over there?
I agree, and I'm thinking of this podcast, and
Yes.
I just launched a new brand, and when I was exploring, the direction to take,
Mhm.
I don't think I looked at one other design focused podcast because I didn't want to copy anyone else that's doing something similar. I looked at all sorts of different podcasts, what they're doing, how their brand is looking, from financial to space to just like general talking podcasts. Then I looked at YouTube creators. I looked at all sorts of things outside of the design world because
Mhm.
ultimately I think I want to expand this to not just, focus on design and illustration. I want to
Right.
focus on everything. But
Right.
I feel like if I kept myself in that lane, then it would just be yet another design podcast. And I wanted to do something more extravagant with the brand. And I think I pulled it off. I'm probably going to evolve it 17 more times over the next few months and years, but that's just the way it is. But kind of on that topic of growing something new, we
Uh-huh.
hear a lot from creators that they're struggling to grow on social. What
Mhm.
advice would you give to creators who are really struggling to hit that next level, game the algorithm, or gain new followers?
First of all, I think that there are so many great people to follow on whatever platform you're looking at who can give really good advice about how to grow on that platform. So there's always educators. And I always like to say, follow the educators and not the salespeople because there are so many people out there where the first thing they want to do is sell you something. So everything educational is geared towards buy this course, buy this thing, buy that. But you have these people who are educating for the sake of education. And I find a lot of times that advice is so helpful. So if you're on Instagram, find the person that is educating for the sake of educating. And that, of course, they may have also a book, they may also have a course, but they're usually not everything is geared towards selling something, right? And I think that that is a really great place to start for figuring out how to up level. And then the tactic that I would suggest if you're looking to up level is to partner with others. Because the moment you partner with somebody else, if you say are on Instagram and you have 1,500 followers and you partner with somebody else who has 750 followers, likely those 750 followers are not your 1,500. So suddenly you are growing. Suddenly you have access to a much bigger and broader audience. And that leads me to my second tactic, which is don't be afraid to partner with people smaller than yourself. Because I think so many people immediately say, okay, well, I want to find somebody who has 1,000,000 followers and I want to partner with only the people who have 1,000,000 followers. And I get that. And of course, some of those partnerships have really deep and helpful impact. But you'd be surprised at how partnering at your peer level is much more powerful at times than partnering and trying to always chase people who are 5 levels above you because you can grow up with your peers.
I agree. And I'm thinking of some of the collabs that I've done with people.
Mhm.
And if I'm remembering correctly, the ones that resulted in more followers, at least, especially followers who remained followers over a
Right.
long period of time, were done with people at my level or below because
Mhm.
their followers seem to be, well, first of all, some of the larger creators might have a lot of bots that are
Yes.
following, but that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Bots is an
but
entire different conversation.
yeah, but it's I agree. It's those creators are fantastic, and you should definitely partner with as many creators as possible, big, small, medium, all
Mhm.
sorts of things. But I think that's going to wrap things up for our lovely chat. Goldie, where can people find you if they want to follow you?
So people can always find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Goldie, or you can find me on Instagram at Goldie Cylon, Cylon. It's a Battlestar Galactica reference. Or you can find me by Googling Goldie Chan. Pretty sure I'm still the first 3 pages on Google search. So
I love that. Definitely go follow Goldie. Make sure to follow the Cosmic Sands podcast. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Instagram at Cosmic Sands, and we'll see you all next time for another chat. Thanks, everyone.